You didn't arrive here by accident. Something subtle, yet deeply rooted within you led you to this exact moment. And by the time we finish, you'll understand, this isn't just another video. It's a reflection, a signal. Perhaps you've begun to notice that the things that once unsettled you no longer have the same grip, that your reactions have softened, and your awareness has deepened. That's not coincidence. That's the shadow beginning to release its hold. The Stoics reminded us, true power doesn't roar, it resonates. It isn't about control, it's about comprehension. It doesn't live in chaos, it dwells in understanding. If something inside you has longed for a peace untouched by external events, then you've already begun the journey. You're no longer tethered to the wreckage of your past. The shadow, formed by fear, shame, and the need to survive, once pulled every string. It dictated your speech, your appearance, even your sense of being, not as a reflection of truth, but as a defense, a barrier against criticism, abandonment, rejection. You weren't living, you were bracing, but gradually, without any grand announcement, that grip has begun to weaken. You notice yourself catching old patterns mid-act, and doing something rare, you pause. You breathe, you wait, and in that small space between urge and response, your freedom begins to take shape. Carl Jung once wrote that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will rule your life, and you'll call it destiny. That's exactly what had been happening. For years, your unconscious self held the wheel, wearing your face, mimicking your voice, pretending to be you. But it wasn't. It was a version of you, molded by trauma, repetition, and inherited patterns. The true you is buried beneath layers of noise. But now, the layers are falling away. You're no longer broadcasting your wounds as identity. Once, your story was your armor, your spotlight, and your prison. You told it because it was your only bridge to connection, hoping someone would hear and echo back. You matter, but something has shifted. The pain still lives within you, but it's no longer your currency. You no longer need to bleed to be acknowledged. You don't have to ache aloud to feel seen. There's a stillness now where the craving once screamed. This is what healing really looks like. Not loud proclamations of being over it, but a quiet restructuring of your inner architecture. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And you have examined, not once, not casually, but persistently. You've turned inward over and over again, and it has transformed you. You no longer speak from the wound. You speak from the scar. And that scar isn't something to hide. It's sacred. It says, I endured, and I lived. Now, you're intentional. Not because you seek to control the world around you, but because you finally understand what it means to act from alignment rather than anxiety. You no longer rush to fill silence. You don't plead to be understood. You understand yourself, and that's enough. You stop performing. You've started existing. There's a difference, and you feel it. When a shadow was steering, discomfort was danger. Stillness felt like drowning, but now it feels like safety, like space. You've begun to trust what shows up in the quiet. Insight, serenity, truth. They rise to meet you when you stop drowning them in distraction. Aristotle once said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And that's what's happening here. A knowing not born of intellect, but of instinct. The kind that doesn't need to be validated to be true. You're no longer propelled by survival. You're led by clarity. When you're misunderstood, you don't unravel. You soften. When old triggers appear, you witness them without collapsing. You're not numb. You're free. And freedom doesn't mean you're void of emotion. It means you're no longer imprisoned by it. You carry yourself differently now. Your presence arrives before you speak, and it says everything. Not because you've grown louder, but because you've become clearer. You're no longer pleading with the world to complete you. You're no longer waiting to be rescued from yourself. That chapter is closed. Plato believed the soul naturally reaches for the light of truth, but becomes clouded by the distractions of the material world. And isn't that what healing truly does? It strips away the noise, the illusions, the identities you never chose but were given. You're not playing those roles anymore. You're rewriting the script, one conscious choice at a time. It's not that you've become flawless. It's that you become present. And presence, that's the true sign that the shadow is fading. Because when you're present, you're no longer reacting to ghosts of the past or projections of the future. You're rooted in the now, responding, not escaping, choosing, not chasing. You no longer need life to be smooth in order to feel peace. You've woven peace into your being. And that peace, it's not brittle. It doesn't vanish at the first sign of resistance. It holds, because it's built on truth, not performance. You're no longer who you once were, not because you've added to yourself, but because you've let go of what never truly belonged. And in that clearing, something real has taken root. Something quiet, something steady. There's a stillness within you now that once felt impossible. A peace that doesn't announce itself. It simply is, anchored, unmoved by the need for applause. You no longer need to shout your growth or prove your progress. You embody it, silently, gracefully, completely. In that quiet shift, it changes everything. Because one of the clearest signs that the shadow is no longer at the helm is how little the past stirs you now. Words that once cut deep pass over you like a breeze. People who once triggered your deepest wounds feel distant now. Like characters from a dream you've finally awakened from. You're not pushing them away. You've simply left the emotional room. You once believed strength was found in being unaffected, that maturity meant stillness, silence, a stony face. But now you understand, it's not about suppression. It's about detachment. The feelings are still there. You still care. You're still moved. But you're not dragged by your emotions anymore. They inform you. They no longer dominate you. That's the shift. That's the integration. And it's quiet. The world may not notice. But you do. You feel it in the lightness of your step when you walk away from chaos without guilt. In the soft exhale when you let someone misunderstand you without the urge to correct. Jung called it emotional alchemy. Not the erasure of pain, but its transformation into wisdom. It's a shift in essence, not appearance. You don't exile your anger now. You invite it in. You ask what it's here to show you. And sadness? You no longer treat it like an intruder. You let it sit beside you. You listen. Sometimes it speaks of unmet needs. Sometimes of release. Either way, you don't rush it away. You receive its message. Gently. There's clarity in your emotional world now. And it's yours. Not control. Not perfection. Clarity. You no longer demand every emotion to be solved on impact. You don't rush to soothe discomfort. You let it unfold. Let it speak. You allow it to guide you. As Aristotle once said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And the more you've allowed yourself to feel without flinching, without censoring, the more you've uncovered your truest self beneath the noise. People notice, even if they can't articulate it. There's a shift in your presence. Less reactive, more rooted, not passive but present. And that presence becomes a quiet filter. The things that once hooked you, arguments, chaos, the urge to explain, slip right past. They don't stick, not because you've gone numb, but because you've become discerning. You've learned what's worth your energy. Plato once wrote that the soul is drawn toward truth and light, but distracted by illusion. And you've stopped chasing illusions. The need to be universally liked, to always be right, to never be misunderstood. You've realized clarity doesn't require company. You can be visible or unseen, praised or dismissed, and still remain whole. This wholeness, this emotional independence, wasn't taught in a seminar or a book. It was carved from experience, from heartbreak, from the long nights you chose to stay with yourself when every instinct screamed to flee. It was shaped in silence, refined in stillness, and deepened by choosing presence over reaction again and again. You don't need to win anymore. Not the debate, not the validation, not even the closure. Socrates once said, the greatest way to live with honor in this world is to be what we pretend to be. And that's what you're doing now, living from truth, not performance. And maybe that's the most profound transformation of all. You're not just regulating emotions, you're leading them. Not with force, but with awareness. You've become the container, the witness, the one who decides what happens next. There's immense strength in that. But it's not a loud, dominating power. It's the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't seek attention because it already knows its worth. It's the steady power of someone who knows their own mind, honors their own heart, and trusts their own voice, even when it speaks softly. And you no longer apologize for that process. You don't justify your boundaries or downplay your quiet. You no longer feel compelled to explain why you choose stillness over stimulation. Where once you would have defended your distance or excused your silence, now you simply let it be. That peace you're building, it doesn't crave validation. It simply needs room. And now, you grant yourself that space, without guilt. When the shadow held the reins, silence felt unbearable. It echoed too loudly, stirred too much. Every quiet moment seemed like a threat. So you performed. You entertained. You filled the gaps with noise, with approval seeking, with anything to avoid feeling invisible. Validation wasn't just comforting, it was survival. But that craving has softened. Now, silence feels sacred. Not hollow, but whole. Brimming with awareness, with presence with you. Because when you stop drowning out the stillness, your real voice finally emerges. Not in slogans or surface affirmations, but in truths that rise slowly, like breath. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And he was right. You stopped chasing answers and applause and turned inward. That pivot changed everything. And when you truly come to know yourself, the act ends. You stop reshaping your tone, your posture, your words to fit a room never meant for you. You stop smiling to make others feel at ease when you're unraveling inside. You stop saying yes when your soul is whispering no. It's not rebellion. It's self-respect. It's not defiance. It's reclamation. You've begun reclaiming the parts of yourself that were taught to be silent. The fragments trained to perform, to placate, to shrink. You've traded the need to be liked for the freedom to be whole. And you didn't do it all at once. You did it slowly, one honest choice at a time. Each moment you chose truth over habit. You peeled away another mask. And what you discovered beneath those layers wasn't shameful. It didn't need fixing. It was astonishing, unfiltered, human, beautifully real. That's what lives beneath the armor. Not weakness, but authenticity. Not flaw, but integrity. That's the real sign of transformation. You no longer mistake your shadow for your identity. You once believed your pain defined you. That without your wounds, there'd be nothing left. But now you see clearly, they weren't your truth. They were your signal. They summoned you inward. They shattered the lie that love must be earned through suffering. They revealed what was real. Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." But that victory doesn't come through denial. It comes through acceptance. The shadow, the parts of you that acted from fear, from defense, from survival, they weren't trying to harm you. They were trying to help. They just didn't know how. Now, instead of pushing them away, you meet them with compassion. You don't fight your inner child. You parent them. You say, "I see you. I know you were trying to keep us safe." And when you stop silencing those emotions and start listening instead, something shifts. The chaos begins to settle. The compulsions begin to fade. Because those forgotten parts of you finally feel heard. What once ruled you, reactivity, overthinking, people-pleasing, is now conscious. There's a pause where panic used to live. A breath where there was once an eruption. You catch yourself. You reflect. And yes, sometimes you fall back into the old rhythms. That's okay. That's human. But the difference is now you notice. And noticing is the start of freedom. Aristotle believes self-knowledge is the root of wisdom. That wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't shout for attention. It shows in how you speak to yourself after a mistake, in how you sit with unease instead of escaping it, in how you return again and again to the self not ruled by fear, but guided by clarity. You catch yourself now. That sharp edge in your tone, that urge to interrupt, that whisper saying you're still not enough. You don't suppress it. You don't shame it. You witness it. And in that witnessing, something powerful happens. You pause. You breathe. You place distance between emotion and action. That distance, that's your power. That's where the old pattern ends and the new path begins. You've stopped collapsing into your reactions. Stopped letting emotions dictate the story. Now you revise, you shape, you choose. And that's not just awareness. That's sovereignty. You're no longer a passenger to your programming. You're steering, calm, conscious, steady. You don't hate the patterns that once governed your life. You thank them. They weren't sabotage. They were survival. And now, you're finally living. They shielded you when you lacked better tools. They kept you above water when the tides were too powerful to withstand. But now, the currents have shifted. You've learned to move differently. And so, you allow those old patterns to rest. No bitterness, only release. Aristotle once wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. The practices of awareness, compassion, and presence have begun to blossom within you. You're evolving into someone who responds instead of reacts, who pauses instead of panics. And that subtle transformation, it creates ripples. Your energy changes quietly at first. You feel lighter, more lucid, more anchored. You no longer step into spaces needing to prove your worth. You arrive with it. People notice the difference, even if they can't explain it. Some are unsettled by it, still moving to the rhythm you've left behind. Others are drawn in, not by your words, but by your being. You no longer chase, you no longer grasp, because your peace isn't tied to anyone's decision to stay. You've stopped mistaking someone's distance for a judgment on your value. You see now, people come and go, but your alignment remains. And that alignment becomes your foundation. It stays steady even when ties loosen, when bonds dissolve, when silence replaces the once comforting dialogue. You're not building from emptiness anymore. You're building from completeness. And that shift redefines your connections. You stop equating constant attention with genuine intimacy. You stop confusing emotional chaos with love. You no longer seek relationships that feel like a thrill ride just to confirm you're still feeling. You've quit romanticizing dysfunction, the ache of codependency once masquerading as devotion. You've moved beyond it. Plato believed the true measure of a man lies in how he wields power. Emotional maturity is power, and you wield it not to control, but to discern. You understand now that authentic love doesn't bind. It doesn't demand performance. It doesn't patch a void. It mirrors your wholeness. The love you now offer doesn't beg for return. It simply is whole, sufficient, present. A love born not of fear, but of freedom. There's a softness within you now, but it isn't fragility. It's strength, tempered and true. The strength of one who no longer needs to shout to be heard, who doesn't barter peace for validation. That softness, that internal calm, carries more weight than any loud proclamation. You're no longer living for the highs and lows. You're living for clarity, for resonance, for peace. And the relationships that endure this version of you, they're different. They're gentler, safer, more honest. They don't feed on lack. They thrive on mutual truth. You've stopped negotiating your value. That old habit, constantly adapting, over-explaining, silently seeking permission to exist, that's behind you now. You no longer contort yourself to fit into spaces too small for your truth. You don't shrink to soothe someone else's discomfort. You've learned that when you abandon yourself to appease others, you're not only giving up authenticity, you're forfeiting peace. And peace that demands your silence? That's not peace. That's performance. A quiet performance, perhaps smiling, nodding, staying silent while your soul screams. But still a performance. And you've come to realize, pretending costs more than it's worth. The truth is, real peace makes room for truth. It's expansive enough to hold discomfort, clarity, even disagreement. It doesn't suppress. It fortifies. That's why your boundaries have evolved. They no longer carry the sting of resentment. They don't arise from fear. They emerge naturally like breath. Clear, steady, and unshakable. You don't need to shout. You don't need to persuade. You simply speak your truth and let others meet you where they're able. Socrates once said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom." And in knowing yourself, You've stopped striving to be everything for everyone. The people meant for you, they understand. Not because you explained it all, but because they've walked their own path. They recognize the resonance. It's not what you say, it's who you are. Your energy speaks before you do. That's the shift. You're no longer trying to be noticed. You're simply arriving as yourself. And that presence filters naturally. What you attract now feels different. Not louder, not more, just cleaner. The energies you encounter are more attuned. Conversations deepen without effort. Interactions feel smoother. That's not coincidence, it's coherence. The way you show up has changed, and so has what shows up for you. Where once you called people in from your wounds, hoping they complete you, now you call from your center, whole, balanced, unneeding. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows." That includes the parts of you that chased validation through endless explanation. But now, you don't resist being misunderstood. You don't fight to be fully seen. You've accepted that some will understand and some won't. You no longer seek clarity in other people's minds. You know your truth. You trust it, and that's enough. So the habit of constant justification dissolves. You no longer compose mental essays for every opinion. You don't rehearse responses to make yourself more legible. You release the urge to be decoded by everyone. And in that release, relief. Because misunderstanding isn't an attack. It's a filter. It shows who resonates with your signal and who still needs noise to feel safe. And that's okay. You let it filter, not with judgment, but with grace. You move more lightly now, no longer burdened by the need to be universally understood. Your clarity doesn't need agreement. It just needs presence. And now, you carry that presence into every space, every exchange, every silence. Even your inner dialogue has changed. There's less harshness now, less inner noise punishing you into silence or second-guessing your steps. You no longer scold. You guide. You pause. You listen. Your inner voice doesn't echo like a drill sergeant. It sounds like someone who truly cares. You've become the presence you once searched for in others. That's not small. That's transformation. And it's more than kindness toward yourself. It's deeper. There's a gentleness in how you move through your inner world, but also a new clarity. You're not making excuses. You're making room. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You're doing that now. Not because life is perfect, but because you've stopped demanding perfection to feel worthy. When your shadow held the pen, your thoughts were a battleground. Everything felt urgent, strained, performative. But now, you're choosing peace over performance, presence over perfection, and that changes everything. Now your soul holds the mic, and it doesn't shout. It doesn't condemn. It doesn't compare. It murmurs. It waits. It gently reminds you of what truly matters when everything else becomes deafening. It draws you back, not with guilt, but with grace. It doesn't chastise you for drifting. It simply lights the way home. You've stepped off the relentless treadmill of urgency, that draining loop of running harder, doing more, pushing further, just to feel worthy. You've stopped gasping for validation like it's your lifeline. You've stopped sacrificing your peace to keep others comfortable. You've stopped letting the world's volume define your value. Because now you understand. There's no trophy, no standing ovation, no number of followers that can ease the pain of feeling estranged from yourself. So you've shifted from striving to selecting, from justifying to embodying, from chaos to clarity, from enduring to perceiving. That shift came without applause. No banner marked the moment, but you feel it deep in your bones, in the way you greet the morning, in the way your breath flows, and how your mind no longer spirals when things fall apart. You've learned that calm isn't something you discover. It's something you evolve into. Not instantly, but gradually, choice by choice. And now, those choices aren't driven by fear. They arise from a different depth, a quieter place that trusts what it senses, even when it can't articulate it. A place that doesn't need to be loud to be certain. Aristotle believed happiness is the soul's expression through deliberate action. That's where you are now. You no longer react, you respond. With intention, with honesty, with fullness. And that kind of presence, it isn't forged in the spotlight. It's crafted in the stillness, in the unseen moments, in the breath between all the doing. Now you move through the world with a gentleness that doesn't plead to be understood. It isn't weakness, it's distilled strength, a quiet power that doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It anchors. It observes. It answers with awareness, not impulse. And that refinement, it isn't polished to please. It's sculpted by truth. You no longer announce your growth to be believed. You simply live in a way that reveals it without a word. Even your solitude has transformed. What once felt like exile now feels like sanctuary. The silence that used to ring hollow has become a kind of melody. You don't fill the quiet with distraction anymore. You sit within it, breathe through it, expand inside it. You remain with yourself, not out of defeat, but devotion, because solitude no longer equals abandonment. It means alignment. You're not retreating out of fear. You're arriving from fullness. You've stopped looking to others to complete you. You've stopped outsourcing your sense of wholeness. And in doing so, you've uncovered one of life's rarest forms of freedom. As Carl Jung once said, loneliness isn't the absence of people, but the inability to express what matters. Now, you finally can. First, to yourself. That's where everything begins. This isn't separation, it's growth. The space between what happens and how you answer it. That's where your freedom lives now. You've found steadiness in that space. Clarity in the pause. When uncertainty arrives, you don't collapse. You anchor. When your truth is tested, it doesn't crumble. It remains. And when love enters, you don't reshape yourself to keep it. You welcome it from your center with open palms, not clenched fists. The difference is subtle, yet profound. You're not disconnected. You're deeply rooted, not cold, just clear, not distant, but fully awake. That intentionality now pulses through everything you touch. How you speak, how you meet someone's gaze, how you choose silence over explanation, presence over performance. And that change, though invisible to many, has redefined your world. Because when your energy is no longer warped by old scripts, when you're no longer imprisoned by outdated roles or unmet expectations, life meets you differently. The people who enter reflect your depth. The moments that unfold mirror your alignment. You're no longer a magnet for chaos. You're a beacon for coherence. Not because you've reinvented yourself, but because you've finally made space for the self that always was. Beneath the masks, the approval-seeking, the pretense. Now you show up whole. Not because there's nothing broken, but because you've stopped seeing yourself only through the fractures. You carry your past, but it no longer carries you. You don't walk under the burden of who you used to be. You walk in the wisdom of who you've become. And that's the truest sign of growth. Not a moment you shouted from a rooftop, not a status update to prove progress, just a quiet certainty, a knowing that moved in silently and made a home in your breath. Your posture, your being, you remembered yourself, not the version molded by survival, not the one contorted to be acceptable, but the self that existed before fear began drawing lines around your worth. You didn't slay the shadow. That was never the mission. You integrated it. You listened to its message. And instead of silencing it, you invited it in. You stopped labeling your darkness as trespasser and started recognizing it as teacher. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's exactly what you've done. You made room for the discomfort. You sat with the parts of yourself others told you to hide. You gave language to what once felt unspeakable. And now, you're no longer ruled by what once held power over you. The shadow still walks beside you, but it doesn't lead. It doesn't hijack your choices or disturb your peace. It whispers sometimes, but you're no longer afraid of its voice. You've learned to hear it without disappearing into it. You've outgrown the urge to exile your darkness, because now you understand what it's made of. Not poison, but protection. Not rot, but confusion. You didn't fix it. You didn't need to. You loved it into harmony. And now, you've stepped into a power so quiet. Most won't even notice it approaching. It doesn't posture. It doesn't demand the spotlight. It needs no permission. It doesn't glitter. It grounds. It holds eye contact with unwavering calm. It sits in stillness without shrinking. It speaks truth, even when truth is inconvenient. Plato called this inner authority the harmony of the soul, a self-governed not by suppression, but by understanding. So if you feel this shift, not just in your thoughts, but in your breath, in your bones, know this, you're not alone. If you've begun softening, releasing, forgiving, nothing's wrong with you. You haven't lost your edge. You've remembered your essence. You're not broken because you're healing. You're not weak for letting go of the roles that once defined you. True growth rarely looks glamorous, but it's always sacred. You're simply remembering. And in that remembering, in that homecoming to your center, you become something powerful for others too. You become permission, a quiet lighthouse for those still lost in the storm. You don't need to preach. You don't need to push. You just need to live. Because the more aligned you are, the more others sense that alignment is possible. That's what this is. Not performance, but return, reunion, with the self that always existed beneath the noise, the striving, the fear. And as you reclaim that self, you show others, wordlessly, that it's safe to do the same. It's safe to soften, to surrender, to live with honesty, to fully belong to yourself. And maybe the most profound shift of all is this. You're no longer trying to become someone else. You finally come home to who you are.